There it is, Thundera. Never before has there been such a beautiful, peaceful, and harmonious place in the universe. But alas, everything explodes someday.
So the time has finally come. Thundercats Roar just aired, and I have really mixed feelings about the show. It does manage to get a laugh from me, and to an extent shows an understanding of the original series, yet there are some aspects that rub me the wrong way. Yes, one of them is the art style, but we shall put a pin in that for later. The first thing is that while the writers do have an understanding of the source material, they only do a serviceable job adapting the first few episodes of the 85 run. There are some changes that may affect the show in the long run. This really boils down to glancing over the actual exodus from Thundera, which in this show is just narrated over by the ghost of Jaga, who in this version died on the planet when it exploded. The other issue is that there is no child Lion-O becoming the adult Lion-O during the whole stasis pod malfunction. Now, the reason why these two seemingly small details are even important are because these are very crucial aspects of Lion-O's character, or at least they should be. In the beginning of the original Exodus episode, we get introduced to the characters, including Jaga, who Lion-O regards as something of a father, maybe uncle figure. Either way, he holds him in high regard. In fact, through the Sword of Omens, Jaga still serves as a spiritual advisor to Lion-O, which he definitely needs early on, seeing that he really doesn't listen to the rest of the Thundercats as much. Especially in this adaptation, my goodness, he basically blows off Tigra until the end of the episode. We also now lack a reason as to why Lion-O is so naive and simplistic in thought process. Here, he's not presented as a kid who has aged into a man, and now has to grow up quickly. Now he's just a guy who acts kind of like a kid, but apparently isn't. Can this be rectified? Of course it can. It's completely possible to expand upon the characters through flashbacks on their time on Thundera, or just any other methods of exposition, but I would prefer flashbacks. They seem to be a lot more effective, at least in this context. Though, time will tell if they're even going to do that just yet. Now, let's get back to the art style, which many have criticized for being derivative of other shows and unfitting for Thundercats. Well, they're kind of right in that sense. While sure the characters are in fact drawn in Victor Cartwright's style, Victor being the producer of the show, the overall boarding, animation, and even comedic timing is very much like OKKO Let's Be Heroes. I don't see much of Thundercats behind it in the visuals department. Despite having two wildly different art styles in its earlier incarnations, both versions of Thundercats did adhere to one specific animation principle: solid drawing, where one pays attention to body structure to give characters weight and depth. Thundercats Roar, like KO, eschews this in favor of visual gags and exaggeration, which was also kind of OKKO's weakness as well, since its action was lacking weight, solidity, and above all, boarding befitting an action comedy show. Rise of the TMNT, on the other hand, is an action comedy that really manages to make the punches hit home. However, what Roar should take from OKKO is their character development. While KO had characters that seemed one note at first glance, they wound up having a bit more depth to them. Just judging from this first couple of episodes, I think that Victor genuinely does have an understanding of Thundercats. Yet again, though, I think the art style is a big weakness. I really think that Victor and the team should have focused more on getting a style that is in line with its predecessors, yet does allow for this more cartoony take. It's obvious that Victor did want to make it his show and thus implement his style, but his time working on more simplistic cartoons is very evident. Perhaps. So, will I be revisiting Thundercats Roar for a redo Design Dungeon episode? I'm really not all that sure if I'm going to. Despite changes in my format and overall judging style, I still do stand by the judgments and assessments that I made at the time. A lot of the characters are kind of middle of the road, and Lion-O really does not inspire confidence for me just yet. Another thing that will really hamper my hopes for the show is that there isn't much weight to any of the conflict. You kind of see that nothing really poses a threat to the Thundercats. All the fights just kind of end within a matter of seconds. It's mostly just a gag. And while I understand you have to be comedic, you still gotta have some stakes, otherwise nobody's going to care. And I think that's probably the worst part of it. There's just very little to get from it. While Victor and the crew do understand the bits and pieces of the Thundercats universe, I don't think they're quite getting it as a whole. Thundercats, at its heart, is a hero's journey, or at least a coming-of-age story. You can pretty much use those two terms interchangeably in this case. It is all about Lion-O becoming the Lord of the Thundercats. He's not actually the official Lord in the original series. In fact, he really does have to prove himself over the course of the first season in both shows. Though in the second one, of course, there was only that one season. It's just... Sure, it's kind of funny. I got some laughs sometimes, but there's just very little to get invested in. Like with OKKO, there was at least a little something that I could get invested in. You know, it was KO trying to figure his place in the world. It was, you wanted to see how he would become stronger, but Lion-O's kind of there, but not there, and you're not certain if he's going to actually progress or not. And that's kind of the problem. He doesn't seem to want to get better. He doesn't have any motivation to improve himself, and that's kind of the problem. A lot of this show really does come down to Lion-O, and that's kind of why I stand by what I said about him before. He's just not that... There's more to him than just being dumb, you know? He's not an idiot. He's naive, but he's not a complete dunce, you know? And that's what really gets me and probably a lot of people about this. Like, they clearly understand Thundercats, they've clearly watched it, but for some reason they're just not wanting to put that little bit of legwork so that people have a little something to attach to, something that's really familiar, not just like the vague image of the Thundercats. Just give them that actual core that should be there. But anyways, I've rambled enough about this. I'm probably not going to revisit it anytime soon. I might keep an eye on it for a little bit, see if it gets better, but chances are I'm not going to revisit it again. This will probably be the last time I ever bring it up. That said, if you want to see what's coming up next on Design Dungeon, by all means subscribe and hit the bell. Also be sure to leave a comment. Tell me just what do you think about Thundercats Roar? Was there anything salvageable about this show? Personally, I think it was the voice actors. They managed to deliver their lines very well for what they were given. But aside from that, I didn't find too much that was worth being interested in. Anyways, see you next time on Design Dungeon.